A presentation about canonical criticism for the New Testament Foundation class at URSHAN Graduate School of Theology. Canonical criticism is a way of analyzing and interpreting the Scripture in which you ask the question, what have you taught me lately? Canonical criticism deals with the text as it is received, as it is currently existing. It's a manner of analyzing the Bible or another canon that looks at what the text is in the current environment. It was the brainchild of James Sanders, who first used the term canon criticism in his publication Torah and Canon in 1972. He changed the term about 12 years later to canonical criticism in his groundbreaking work Canon and Community. Sanders is concerned with both the canonical process and the canonical product, or the document that is called a canon. The process deals with the way the text was arrived in the current environment, and the product deals with the text that exists in the current environment. Sanders' canonical criticism deals with two particular issues. First of all, it deals with the canonical process. That is the long history that begins when a religious community repeats or modifies an earlier tradition and thus gives it canonical or sacred status. To Sanders, this process is extremely important. To understand that process is to understand the text as it is received. The second part of Sanders' criticism deals with the canonical hermeneutics. Sanders would like to feel that he could locate the precursor materials and then the hermeneutic by which they are adopted, represented, or resignified to become canonical. In other words, Sanders wants to know how the text was received and how the text is interpreted in a particular environment. One of the groundbreaking theorists in this particular arena was Dr. Brevard S. Childs. Dr. Childs was a professor at the Yale University School of Divinity for almost 60 years. Everyone in America acknowledges him as a preeminent theologian. He probably had no partners in the 20th century, according to the other theologians and those that study him. Brevard Childs adopted the term, and he argued that earlier models of historical criticism have generally failed because they became divorced from current use in the churches and synagogues, because they did not understand the dynamics of the Bible as religious literature, and they failed to relate the literature to the community that was formed by it, and which in turn shaped the literature in its final form. Dr. Childs used the term canon criticism in his early writings, but later denied the term, and in his later writings calls it a canonical approach. He argued that to call this a criticism aligned it with the more traditional historical methods and criticisms which investigated pieces of the canon. His canonical approach considered the message of the canon and or the significant units of the Scripture. Childs would like to contend that he dealt with the final text of the Scripture. Having said that, then, what is canonical criticism? John Sailhammer defines it this way. Canon criticism addresses the question of the meaning of the biblical text in their present form in the Old Testament canon. The major task of a canonical analysis of the Hebrew Bible is to understand the peculiar shape and special function of the books that comprise the Hebrew canon. Its focus is on the final form of the text itself. Notice the words shape and function of the books. A canonical approach considers the content and the form of the canon. In the Anchor Dictionary to the Bible, Shepherd defines canonical criticism as less than a formal criticism, is less a formal criticism than an approach or series of approaches that seeks to raise neglected questions about the form and function of the Scripture, both Jewish and Christian. Carol Newsom from Emory University in Atlanta, specifically canonical criticism is concerned with how Scripture's final form was created within a believing community and how the meanings created by that final form continue to guide the reading practices of the community. Notice, form and meanings, form and content. Bailey defines canonical criticism by saying it seeks to take seriously the dynamic and ongoing interplay between the authoritative tradition eventually transmitted as sacred text and the believing community both during and since biblical times. Notice that canonical criticism considers the text as it is received. And canonical criticism looks at how the text impacts the community. That is, as the community reads the text, how do they receive it? There's not a consideration of historical background necessarily. Many of the earlier questions of getting back to the original form of the text are not considered in canonical criticism, but rather how the text as received impacts the community. But it also considers the manner in which the community impacts the text. For Childs, the text that he had was the operative text. He wasn't concerned about the original text, but he was concerned about how the canon affected the community. Why is there a need for canonical criticism? Childs felt that the historical critics had ignored the authority of the Scriptures by their analysis of small bits of text. It would be similar to a watchmaker who received a beautiful classic watch. And then in looking at that watch, he opens the back of it, begins to investigate how it works, and begins to look at the pieces and take them out, only to get to the end of the dissociation and realize he didn't know how to put it back together. Childs felt that was exactly what the historical critics had done. They were taking the Scripture apart but did not know how to put it back together. Oswalt says it this way. In other words, the net effect of 200 years of higher critical work on the Bible is to render its theology null and void. Sanders said that this is a way of dealing with the biblical text that while admitting the destructive results of historical criticism, yet preserves the Bible as a theologically valid document. Why canonical criticism?